Warning, this is going to contain some potential spoilers for current and future seasons of House of the Dragon, Knight of the Seven Kingdoms, and for Game of Thrones if you haven't already seen it, so viewer discretion advised. When Rhaena flies into the Battle of the Gullet on the back of her new dragon, Sheepstealer, in the newest season of House of the Dragon, we're led by the characters to focus on Sheepstealer's wildness as the reason she just starts incinerating everything in sight. And while that's certainly a strong possibility, we also have some other factors on the board that might be relevant here. I'm talking about these factors in particular. Bloodraven, also known as Brynden Rivers, one of the bastards of Aegon IV, who you likely also know as the old man in the tree that Bran visits in the original series of Game of Thrones, and Bran Stark, a powerful greenseer who ends up on the throne at the end of the original series. We know from Game of Thrones that Bran is capable of warging across time, and not even just into the minds of animals. The Hold the Door episode proved that Bran was able to warg even Willis or Hodor from decades in the future, and the implications of this are humongous. If he's able to warg a person, he can almost certainly warg animals across time too, and it's possible that Bloodraven also has this power, though we don't know for sure. One other thing we know Bloodraven can do that Bran can almost certainly do as well is give people dreams. Vivid, powerful dreams that arguably put people into psychosis and certainly affect people's behaviors and life choices in the story quite heavily. And in a lot of ways, I've been noticing some of Bran and Bloodraven's fingerprints all over both House of the Dragon and A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms. For instance, in Knight of the Seven Kingdoms we meet Daeron Targaryen. No, not that one. Dude, come on now. Yeah, that's the one. The drunk one. The first thing that Daeron says in the show is that he saw Dunk in a dream and that he's bad news and better stay the fuck away from him. We later find out that in this dream, a dead dragon falls on top of Duncan, but Dunk manages to walk away from it. Initially, Daeron thought this was a vision about himself, but it seems more likely that it was really about Baelor, who dies in the Trial of Seven at Ashford in Dunk's arms. It's pretty likely that Bran or Bloodraven is responsible for these dreams, and it's more than likely Bloodraven, who's still living in King's Landing at this point and serving as Hand of the King. Things are going to get really messy when we start trying to analyze individual cases of dreams and animals behaving strangely, to try to deduce what Bran and Bloodraven might have been trying to do in any particular circumstance. So let's zoom out first and try to get a grip of the bigger picture, which should make it clearer what we're looking at in distinct cases. For starters, it seems likely that all of the manipulation is ultimately coming from the future, meaning young Brynden Rivers is also likely receiving visions from his future self or Bran, assuming those are really even different things. But unlike many of our other characters, Brynden is also a greenseer like Bran, and in fact, Bran and Bloodraven share some blood. They're both part Blackwood, and the Blackwoods are known for their connections to the stranger elements of the story, greenseers and wargs and all of that. So we could probably assume that when getting dreams and prophecies from the future, a young Bloodraven could probably engage with whoever was trying to communicate with him, certainly much more than poor Daeron. But what are Bran and Bloodraven from the future sending back all these dreams and messing with animal behavior for? It likely all boils down to bloodlines. Preston Jacobs has a lot of really good Ice and Fire fan theories over on his channel, one of which is a series called The Genetics of Dragons and War, where he establishes a theory that certain Valyrian genes are connected to dragon riding and to dragon hatching, in the same way that Stark and Blackwood genes seem to be connected to greenseeing and warging. I won't try to restate his whole argument here. You should totally go check out his channel and those videos in particular if that's something that interests you. But for our purposes, you really just need to know that if Preston is right, then Daenerys is exceptionally important because she's the only person in hundreds of years who was able to hatch dragons. And unless something else is going on, like Mirri Maz Duur, that sorceress who heals Khal Drogo in Season 1 of Game of Thrones, possessing secret dragon knowledge, the most likely answer is that Dany has special genes that make dragon hatching possible. If that's the case, then Bran and Bloodraven's meddling is probably largely about that. They know they're going to need dragons in the battle against the army of the dead. Not just because being able to burn big swaths of an enemy army is pretty clutch, but because burning the dead is the only way to even eliminate the other army in this case. Without a lot of fire, a human force would be overwhelmed by the Night King's army, this, he can simply reanimate all the old and new corpses as they go. Arya ends up killing the Night King rather than a dragon, but without the dragons, they wouldn't have even made it that far. And there's another Preston Jacobs series that's relevant here too, his time-traveling Bran series, which asserts that Bran and Bloodraven might be trying different things to get the outcome that they're looking for, going back and changing different things each time they fail by warging their consciousness back in time. If that theory holds, then the timeline we know as the timeline, the one where Daenerys hatches 3 dragons and takes them to the Battle of Winterfell, where the Night King ends up being defeated, then we know that there needs to be a perfect sequence of marriages and passing of genes leading to Dany. Someone with dragon hatching and dragon riding abilities who can bring dragons back into the world at the exact moment they're needed more than they've ever been. Or the only time they've ever been needed, really. They seem to be a huge problem the rest of the time. And that means every single Targaryen death in the story needs to be viewed with some suspicion. If that person lived, the whole timeline of marriages and coronations shifts, and Daenerys is probably not even born. And some of the other timelines could, in theory, lead to dragon hatchers, but again, this is the timeline we know leads to a dragon hatcher. One big implication of this might be that certain combinations of families are outright dragon gene killing, in which case the mysterious deaths of whole groups within the Targaryen family start to make a lot of sense from Bran and Bloodraven's perspective. For instance, Prince Baelor from Knight of the Seven Kingdoms is married to a Dondarrion, a Stormlander unlikely to have random dragon genes floating around. But Maekar, his younger brother, is married to a Dane. The Danes are Dornish, and they're not like the other Dornish for the most part, most of whom are either descendants of the Rhoynar who fled Essos about a millennium ago, or are Andals, like the rest of the Stormlanders and Reachers around them, and also have no Valyrian background. The Danes, though, have that white hair and purple eyes combo that seems to indicate they might also have some Valyrian blood, and that they, like the Targaryens and Velaryons, might have resettled in Westeros from Valyria at some point long ago. This means that Maekar's sons, like Egg, might have an exponentially higher chance of birthing dragon riders and hatchers down the line than Baelor's sons would. And this is what I mean about not getting too lost in what the meaning of any one dream or plot might be. We don't really need to know exactly how Bran and Bloodraven might have intended to exploit Daeron to cause Baelor's death. Maybe the goal was just to make Daeron afraid of Dunk, so that he would lie about Dunk kidnapping Egg, which ensured that the Trial of Seven would happen. Or maybe Daeron was manipulated into fighting in that trial, knowing that he was a coward and would just take a dive and be out of the fight, making the chance of Baelor having to fight a much more formidable fighter that much higher. But either way, within our bigger theory, we can see that Baelor needs to die, as part of a chain of deaths leading to Aegon the Unlikely, our little Egg, ultimately becoming king, and Daenerys' great-grandfather. That bit of Dane Valyrian blood, about 1/16 of Dany's genetics, might be the difference between Dany being a dragon hatcher or not. And if not Dany herself, then someone in Egg's line. Community Broadcasting Network is fully viewer supported, so if you like what we're doing here, be sure to like and subscribe, and leave a comment to help boost our engagement. And the number one way you can help us out is by donating to our Patreon. We have a full crew of people here at CBN working on new content every day, and your donations help keep a roof over our heads and food on our table. Thank you so much for watching and for supporting community media. Which leads me back to Rhaena and Sheepstealer. There's a disconnect between the books and the show here, as Rhaena does not capture Sheepstealer in the books. Another character named Nettles, who seems to be omitted from the show, does. In the books, it's said that Jace flew too low over the Triarchy's fleet, that Vermax takes a fatal wound, and that Jace is then pumped full of arrows by the Myrish sailors on a ship nearby, all of which we see in the show. But in either case, we have a mistake. In the show, it's Rhaena coming in with a new dragon, drawing Jace's attention, and basically forcing the mistake that leads to his death, and in the book it's just flying too low that does it. And either of these might be Bran or Bloodraven manipulating the dragons in order to cause Jace's death. On paper, Jace is half Targaryen and half Velaryon, which should mean he's brimming with dragon blood. But we all know from the show, and guess from the books, that Jace is actually a son of Harwin Strong. The Strongs probably don't have any dragon genes, but Rhaenyra's sons by Daemon, like Aegon, who eventually becomes King Aegon III, have pretty strong dragon genes on both sides. The Hightower branch of House Targaryen, like Aegon II, Helaena, and Aemond, also probably don't have much in the way of dragon genes in the long run. A lot of these characters are dragon riders, but remember, what we really need is dragon hatchers, which seems to be a female-coded trait, and that might be why there are so many brother, sister, uncle, niece intermarriages in House Targaryen. On some level, they know that these dragon genes are important, which is why they keep inbreeding to keep them in the house. So just because Jace or Aemond could fly dragons themselves doesn't mean they would ultimately be capable of having dragon hatcher children or grandchildren. And if I'm right about how strong, that means all of Rhaenyra's kids by Harwin would ultimately have to be killed in order for this plan to work, which should really make us wonder about the Aemond and Lucerys incident at Storm's End too. In the books, it's more ambiguous, and it does seem possible that Aemond fully intentionally instigated this and killed Luke. In House of the Dragon though, it gets painted almost as a tragic accident. Aemond still clearly tries to antagonize Luke, which causes Arax to buck up and blow some fire at Aemond and Vhagar. At which point Vhagar goes fully into kill mode, shredding Luke and Arax while Aemond begs her to stop and to listen to his orders. That's another moment that really reeks of Bran Bloodraven. This was the point of no return in the Dance of the Dragons, as there was basically no way back to peace once one of Rhaenyra's sons had been killed, especially considering the black side had many more dragons than the greens. How do we know Bran or Bloodraven wasn't inside of Vhagar's mind, taking control over her over Aemond and killing Luke in order to force the Dance of the Dragons to happen? But this opens up another interesting question. If the point of Bran Bloodraven's scheming is to make sure that there are dragons around the year 300, and for context, Joffrey and Marjorie's wedding was New Year's Day in the Westerosi calendar in the year 300. So that there would be dragons in the world to fight the army of the dead, isn't the dance, bad? Before the dance, there was like 18 dragons, and after the dance, there were never rideable dragons again until Dany. Wouldn't it be better if there hadn't been this crazy dragon war between family members that killed off pretty much all the dragons if your goal was to make sure there were still dragons 170 years or so later? I have to think that if they could play with the timeline this far back, one of the first things that Bran Bloodraven might have tried was stopping the dance from happening. The number one problem is that the Rhaenyra and Daemon genes, which might be especially potent dragon rider and hatcher blood, get reduced to a junior branch of House Targaryen if there was peace. Either Rhaenyra concedes to Aegon and the Hightower branch become the main line, in which case Dany, if she still existed at all, would be marginal as a character and not likely to be gifted any dragon eggs. Or Aegon concedes to Rhaenyra, in which case the strong branch are the main line, and that gets us pretty much the same outcome. But in either of these cases, is there really that much of a chance that a settled peace would have lasted very long after Viserys' death in 129? At the end of the day, some kind of peace settlement ends up putting one branch of a family with dragons in a subordinate position, which they would be unlikely to ever accept in the long run. If the dance hadn't started in 129, it probably would have just started a few years later anyway, as eventually the side on the outside looking in would have wanted to take control from the other. Would Aegon III end up surviving that war if he wasn't still a child? If he had a full-grown dragon and went to war? And if not, then Rhaenyra and Daemon's line ends there. And with it, the possibility for Daenerys or someone with comparable power to come along down the line. Which means that as cataclysmic as the Dance of the Dragons is, it might not even be the worst timeline. There might have been an even more intense dragon war a few years later that totally wiped the Targaryens out, giving Bran Bloodraven nothing left to grasp at. If the goal was to put Aegon III on the throne and get the line stemming from him to Dany. Keep an eye out for any potential meddling from Bran Bloodraven that you happen to notice in Night of the Seven Kingdoms and House of the Dragon. And let us know in the comments what other kind of screwy things you think they might have had a hand in. Bloodraven will eventually make an appearance in Night of the Seven Kingdoms too, though I'm not sure if it will be in Season 2, which apparently they're already working on. Thanks a lot for watching, y'all, and we'll see you next time.